Gopijana Vallabha Giri Bharadhari Gopijana Vallabha Giri Bharadhari Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Shri Shrimada's Divine Grace Sesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Vibhidivandacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Padavajagacharya Stotra Sata Shri Shrimada's Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja Ki Jai Ananta Gauri Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Giridhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Jamuna Maya Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Maharani Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Harinam Sankirtana Ki Jai Brihat Madanga Ki Jai All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 21, Text 19. Eka swayam san jagata susrikshaya. Eka swayam san jagata susrikshaya. Dvitiya yatman adiyogamaya. Dvitiya yatman adiyogamaya. Srijasyada pasi punargrasisyase. Srijasyada pasi punargrasisyase. Yatorna nabir bhagavan swashakti bihi. Yatorna nabir bhagavan swashakti bihi. Ekaha swayam san jagata srishikshaya. Dvitiya yatman adi yogamayaya. Sujasyada pasi punargrasisyase. Yatorna nabir bhagavan swashakti bihi. Anybody else like to chant? Okay. Ekaha, one. Swayam, yourself. San, being. Jagataha, the universes. Chishikshaya, with a desire to create. Advityaya, without a second. Atman, in yourself. Adi, controlling. Yogamaya, by Yogamaya. Shujasi, you create. Adaha, those universes. Pasi, you maintain. Punaha, again. Gadishyase, you will wind up. Yata, like. Ornanabihi, a spider. Bhagavan, O Lord. Swashakti bihi, by its own energy. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. My dear Lord, you alone create the universes. O personality of Godhead, desiring to create these universes, you create them, maintain them, and again wind them up by your own energies, which are under the control of your second energy called Yogamaya. Just as a spider creates a cobweb by its own energy and again winds it up. Purport. In this verse, two important words nullify the impersonalist theory that everything is God. Here, Kardama Muni says, O personality of Godhead, you are alone, but you have various energies. The example of the spider is very significant also. The spider is an individual living entity, and by its energy it creates a cobweb and plays on it. And whenever it likes, it winds up the cobweb, thus ending the play. When the cobweb is manufactured by the saliva of the spider does not become impersonal. Similarly, the creation and manifestation of the material and spiritual energy does not render the creator impersonal. Here, the very prayer suggests that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee. Therefore, he is Satchidananda Vigraha, the form of bliss, knowledge, and eternity. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhustam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. So, we're continuing with the prayers that are being offered by Kardama Muni to Lord Vishnu. Specifically, he's praying to Lord Vishnu. He's saying a lot of things in glorification. That's what you do. You know, prayers are not just asking for something, but glorification as well. So he's doing both. He's glorifying Lord Vishnu here in so many different ways. And his specific request was back about 4 verses prior to this when he says, desiring to marry a girl of like disposition who may prove to be a veritable cow of plenty in my married life to satisfy my lusted desires, I too have sought the shelter of your lotus feet, etc. So he's praying for to marry a girl of like disposition who can help him in his household life. That's what he's praying for. And somebody might ask the question, well, actually, the question was asked. Srivas Prabhu raised the question, I think, in the last class I gave, and Prabhupada brings it up in his purport here. Why is Kardama Muni praying for a wife, for material enjoyment if he's seen the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face? He was that successful, that advanced that he could see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. So, why is he? And Prabhupada answers. He raises the question and he answers it. This is in the purport to text number 16. Prabhupada says, a question may be raised. Since Kardama Muni was advanced in spiritual life, why then did he not ask the Lord for liberation? And here Prabhupada answers. He said, why? Well, he elaborates on the question. Why did he want to enjoy material life in spite of his personally seeing and experiencing the Supreme Lord? And here's the answer. It says, the answer is that not everyone is competent to be liberated from material bondage. And then Prabhupada elaborates upon that. So not everyone's competent to be liberated from material bondage. And I think the previous class I gave, I read an excerpt from a lecture Prabhupada gave where he was talking about fallen souls, and he was making the point that everybody in this material world is a fallen soul. From Lord Brahma down to the insignificant ant, all are fallen souls. It means they all have some material desire. So Kardama Muni has some material desire. He's a great exalted personality. I mean, his desire to have a wife that he could assist him in his service to his father, Lord Brahma, of populating the universe, it's not on the same level as, say, Ravana, who was after every beautiful woman he could lay his eyes on. No, there's gradations there. Kardama Muni is very elevated, very pious, very virtuous, but he has some material desire, and that's why he's in this situation. So, there's a sense in which every living entity in the material world is the same. And that sense is Anandamayo Biasat. We're all hankering after pleasure. Prabhupada, stated that in many different lectures. So right from the insignificant little ant way up to Lord Brahma, every living entity is hankering for happiness, pleasure, a better experience. Okay? That's the motivating. That's what every living entity has in common, and that's what's motivating every living entity for practically every action it performs. Most living entities don't have any choice in how they're going to go about doing that. There's 8,400,000 species of life, and the 8 billion non-human species, they have no choice about how they're going to go about doing that, because they're completely under the control of lower modes of material nature, and they're just totally dominated by instinctual drives. In other words, they are trying to have a better experience, but it's governed by the modes of nature that they're under the influence, completely controlled by. They're like a hamster on a treadmill. If you put a hamster on a treadmill and you put some cheese kind of like off at a distance, and he kind of gets the idea that, okay, if I just go forward, I'll get the cheese. And he just kind of he just runs on that treadmill indefinitely, thinking he's going to get the cheese. But, the cheese stays at the same distance away, and the hamster just doesn't get it. The hamster doesn't get it. He keeps running on the treadmill, and he's not getting any closer to the cheese, but it doesn't seem to worry him. He just keeps running on the treadmill. So the non-devotees, definitely, those 8 million species of non-humans, that's exactly what they're like. And even, to be honest with you, among the 400,000 human-like species, there's a lot of treadmill running going on. There's a lot of human beings who are trying to be happy, just, going after sense gratification, and they're not thinking that, well, hey, this isn't working. They just keep running. They're not very thoughtful, because if one is predominantly influenced by the two lower modes of material nature, passion and ignorance, there's not much light. You see, it's only when one approaches the mode of goodness. The mode of goodness is characterized by an increased sense of knowledge and happiness. So somebody, when they kind of approach the mode of goodness, they'll be thinking, well, wait a second, what is it that I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to be, ultimately, why am I working so hard? Why am I endeavoring in so many different ways? Well, because I want to have a better experience. I want to be happier. I want to have a better experience. So then, that thoughtful person will think, well, what is it that causes an experience? I mean, how do you experience anything? With your consciousness. And then that person will think, well, what's the cause of, what produces consciousness? Where does consciousness come from? Is consciousness, the result of something I'm wearing? Like, for instance, is this garland, what's producing consciousness? No, I'm taking off the garland. I'm still experiencing, even without the garland. Okay, well, that's obvious. But what about, parts of your body? Let's say if I take off this finger, I'm not going to do it, don't worry. But if I would take off this finger, I would be experiencing a lot of pain. But, so you even without what to speak of a finger, even without your arm, even without both your arms, even without both your legs, even if you don't have some of the internal organs. I had my tonsils taken out when I was about 5. You can have your appendix taken out. You can have your liver, pieces of your liver taken out, your spleen. You could have only 1 kidney, 1 lung. Still you're going to experience. Once again, so you could say, oh, sure, that's obvious. We all know that. Everybody knows experience is dependent upon the brain, right? That's what, you got to have a brain. Well, generally, that works, but because if somebody takes a mallet and whacks you over the head with that and knocks you out cold because your brain just, boom, from the impact, now you don't experience anything. But there are cases, and this is interesting, there are cases of somebody experiencing and not having a brain. You could be experiencing without a working brain. Anyway, I'll give you 2 examples, okay? One example is, this took place about, 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago, I can't remember exact dates, but there was a student in Cambridge University in England, and he was having some headaches. I think he was a graduate student in mathematics, and he was having some headaches. So he went to the campus doctor, and the campus doctor examined him and noticed that, your head looks a little swollen. So he sent him to a specialist. He sent him to this neuro something, I can't remember his title, but the guy was scientist / doctor dealing with these types of things. So they did a CAT scan, okay? And the CAT scan showed that this fellow, his head was full of fluid. He had a disease called hydrocephalus, and his head was full of this fluid, and it had destroyed 96% of his brain. They're supposed to have 4.5 centimeters or 45 millimeters of brain tissue. That's working condition. He had 2, so he had only 4% of the brain tissue that he was supposed to have, and so now, and you could say, well, I've heard it said that we only use 5% of our brain, so yeah, no. Yeah, we may be, but according to medical science, this guy should not have been experiencing anything. But he was totally normal. Not only was he totally normal, he had a 128 IQ, and he was an honors student at mathematics. So figure that out. They couldn't figure it out. The scientist who was doing the examination, his name was John Lorber. He was a pretty open-minded guy. He came to the conclusion that, the mind and the brain are 2 different things, because this guy's brain is not, doesn't have the capacity to enable him to function like that. Imagine here, like we have so many things running on electricity here, but imagine if all of a sudden we only had 2% of 4% of the electricity. It wouldn't work. On 4% of the electricity, this microphone wouldn't work, these lights wouldn't work, that clock wouldn't work, on and on, whatever else. Doesn't see. So in the same way, he had 4% of his brain tissue, and according to even medical science, is saying, no, there's no way this guy should have been able to function, but he was. Okay, that's one example. Here's another example. Okay, there's this whole phenomenon of out-of-body experience. So this is one case. There was this fella. He was in a car accident, something like that, and they took him to the hospital. And when he was in the hospital, they, by the time he got to the hospital, they thought he was a goner because he wasn't breathing, his heart wasn't beating. They put some, things on his head to measure what was going on, his, brain activity, and there was none. There was no brain activity. It was called flat lines, they call it. No, no brain activity. So they thought, well, this guy's a goner, but anyway, let's try. So they put him on the table there, and they undressed him and did what they had to do in preparation. They noticed he had false teeth, so they didn't want him. They were loose, and they took him out and they put him in a jar and stuck it in a drawer because they didn't want him to swallow it or something like that and choke on it. And then they did their thing. They put the paddles on him, and they were successful. They resuscitated him, but he was out for a while. He was out for a pretty good stretch there. And so when he came to, this this doctor, who was doing studies on out-of-body experiences, came and interviewed him, and asked him about his experience, and said, "Did you experience anything unusual, during that time you're here?" He said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "Oh, I'm just doing a study on," and he kind of the guy was reluctant to talk about it, but he sort of pried it out of him, and then he described this experience he had, and he said, and then as the doctor was leaving, the one that was interviewing him, he said, "By the way, could you tell the nurse I want my teeth back?" Because they didn't give him the teeth. "I want my teeth back." And he said, "Oh," yeah, she left them she put them in the drawer underneath the, you have these tables there in the operating room. She put him in the drawer there. And also, if you don't mind, find out from the doctor why he was flapping his arms like a bird. So the doctor was interviewing him. He asked the nurse, "Hey, this guy's asking for his teeth back." He said, "What? How did he know? How did he know?" Because he was out. She took the teeth out when he was supposedly had no brain activity. He shouldn't have been. He saw the whole thing. He was watching the whole operation from a point outside his body, in the subtle body, basically. And so they were shocked, and the doctor was shocked too, because when this fellow, the interviewer, asked him, "Hey, the patient was asking, why were you flapping?" He said, "How did he know that? How's that possible? He was out, And he said, "Well, yeah, I was doing that because I learned that. I've been doing that for years, because after I get all sterile, the doctors, they scrub up before an operation, and he said, I don't want to touch anything. I don't want to touch anything because I might, contaminate. So I just point with my elbows, to different things, and my assistants just know from my gestures what I want." You see, so he confirmed that, yeah, I was doing that. So there's absolutely no way this guy should have been able to be aware of this, because no brain waves, no flat lines. So anyway, so it's interesting. So these are two categories of, and there are more examples of this, but that's enough. It's empiric evidence that supports the idea that you don't really even require a brain, to be experiencing things. Although generally speaking, that's how it works. But there are cases where people don't have a brain that's working and they're experiencing. Just a very crude analogy. It's just like, say you're driving down the road in a car and you run out of gas. Okay, well, it's not the end of the world. You can if you're late for an appointment or something, you have a dentist appointment and you're only a few blocks away, you just, pull your car over to the side or push it over to the side, lock it up, and you walk the rest of the way. You see, it's not like if you can't drive your car, you can't get to your appointment. No, you can also walk. So in the same way, we have like this. There's different systems. The main system is the gross material body, the main system for interacting with this material world. But we also have like a subsystem, and that subsystem is like the subtle body. Right? I'll give you an example, and this is kind of like will lead into what this has to do with devotional service. And okay, so here's an example of how this could work. Well, here, first example is like in Mayapur. Everybody, if you've been to Mayapur, raise your hand. Okay, the power goes out sometimes, right? But what happens like within a minute or so from after the power goes out? The generators kick in, right? Remember that? The power goes down, and then you're out for a bit, and then you hear this. They have generators, and the generators kick in, and that supplies the electricity until the power comes back again. So it's like that. There's a subsystem that supports the other system. So here's an analogy, okay, of how, and hopefully we'll make the whole thing make sense and see how it has to do with devotional service. Hypothetical situation. There's a man. He's living in a house, okay, and in his house, he's, like everybody else, he's connected to the, to the grid. He's got power coming in from Con Edison or whatever, and he also has a generator. He has a generator in his backyard, just like we have a generator in our backyard. I don't know if some of you might not be aware, but we have like a big generator in the parking lot over there. We use it maybe for Rath Yatra, and it's there for an emergency in case the power goes down. You got the generator. It runs on a different type of fuel. It's a different system. Okay, so this man he's on the grid. He has this nice modern generator in his backyard in case, something goes for an emergency. But one day he gets a book. He picks up this book by Henry David Thoreau, Walden 2. And he reads about how Henry David Thoreau is, saying, we're wasting our life, striving after, comforts and everything. And we should, Henry David Thoreau was famous for saying, why fritter your life away for sense, I can't remember the word, why fritter your life away for these material comforts, simplify, something like that. It's a paraphrase, but, and he did it. He moved away from the comforts of living in Boston, and he moved out to this place called Walden Pond, and he had like a little cabin, and he didn't have, I don't know if they had even electricity back in those days, or they did. Okay, so he just, he gave that up. He voluntarily gave up electricity and running water and all this kind of stuff, and he just was living at Walden Pond, you see? So the analogy is this, that it's just like, and he actually experienced a lot, and the people who knew him said, he's crazy, he's lost it, wow. But he was enjoying a better quality of life than the people who were criticizing him and thinking he was crazy. He learned how to, live very simply and naturally, and he had a lot of peace of mind, and he was very healthy and like that. And whereas these people who were criticizing him, they were just working like the hamsters, trying to make sure they had a lot of comfort and everything, and they were miserable in the meantime. So the analogy is this, that as devotees, you see, if we have to be, as soon as we're prepared to give up gross and subtle desires for sense gratification, then we don't need a gross or subtle material body. See, these people it's just interesting that, these people like the man who, the boy who didn't have a brain, and the people who have these near-death out-of-body experiences and who even experience other realms, they keep the same sense of identity. See, so it's like, they're disconnected from the gross material body and the gross material apparatus, but they're still connected to the subtle apparatus. They still have the sense of the same person, same sense of who they are, same personality. But if we can give up both gross and subtle desires for sense gratification, then once again, you don't need a gross or subtle material body. And then that's when you can start, and if addition to that, while simultaneously, while understanding that, you're engaging in devotional service, then you could start developing your spiritual relationship with Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, to those who are constantly devoted, who worship me with love, I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. Out of compassion for them, I, who am dwelling within their heart, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. See? So when you engage in devotional service, while simultaneously trying to give up the desires for gross and subtle material sense gratification, then Krishna reveals proportionately, Yeyatamam papajante tam sataiva bhajamiham. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. See, so if one tries to sincerely surrender to Krishna, and actually really is trying to give up the desires for gross and subtle sense gratification, then Krishna destroys with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. He kind of enlightens those people like that, and you start understanding about your actual spiritual identity, totally separate from the gross and subtle bodies like that. So, that's, now getting back to today's verse, so Prabhupada says here in the purport, he says, in this verse there are two important words nullify the impersonal theory that everything is God. But he doesn't say what those two important words are. So I'm going to stop the class in a second. If anybody would like to suggest what those two important words are, I'll entertain all comments, because I couldn't figure it out. My guess would have been the various energies, but anyway, Prabhupada doesn't specifically say. And then here, towards the end of the purport, there's another thing that kind of I was struggling with, and this is why I kind of gave the class the way I gave it, because the purport was a bit of an enigma to me. Prabhupada says here, the very prayer suggests that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee. And I really was having difficulty seeing the connection between the prayer that's being offered here, unless it's Prabhupada here, the very prayer suggests. It sounds like Prabhupada is referring to this particular translation, and I couldn't see how this particular translation, it was sort of indicating that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee. If by very prayer, Prabhupada means his whole prayer, that makes sense. That makes sense. And maybe that's the proper way to understand it, that here the very prayer, meaning the whole prayer that Kardama Muni is offering, that suggests that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee. Therefore, and Prabhupada goes on to say, now therefore, he is Satchidananda Vigraha, the form of bliss, knowledge, and eternity. And I was also struggling to understand how that followed from the previous sentence. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any question or any insight onto any of those three questions that I just raised? What are the two words? How is the very prayer suggesting that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotees? And how does it follow on from that he's Satchidananda Vigraha, the form of bliss, knowledge, and eternity? So essentially I'm giving you my job. I'm supposed to explain the purport, but at least I brought out the points that need to be thought about. So does anybody have any thought about this idea? What are the two words? What is the very prayer that suggests that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee? And how, following on from that, how is that evidence that he's Satchidananda Vigraha, the form of bliss, knowledge, and eternity? So before we let Archita say something, because I know he'll have something intelligent to say about it, or Swavas, anybody else? Can you think of anything? Okay, so Archita, what do you have to say? Swavas Prabhu? Any thoughts? I made it clear, right, what I was asking? Prabhupada says, in this verse, two important words nullify the impersonalist theory that everything is God. Which two important words? And further down he goes, here, the very prayer suggests that God is sentient and can hear the prayers and fulfill the desires of the devotee. So maybe by very prayer, I don't think, if it's just this prayer, this one translation I read today, that doesn't make any sense to me. But if if very prayer is referring to the entire prayer by Kardama Muni, that makes sense. But I can't understand how does that indicate that he's Satchidananda Vigraha, the form of bliss, knowledge, and eternity. Does anybody see the connection there? Okay, no problem. Yeah, Archita. Before Archita says, I'll just relate one thing to you. So Prabhupada in I think it was 72, the Nectar of Devotion came out, maybe earlier, it was here in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada told the devotees, now this valuable book, Nectar of Devotion, has come out. So everybody should read it once, twice, thrice, until you have threadbare understanding. He said, don't just come running to me, every time you come, because Nectar of Devotion gets pretty esoteric as you go on. He said, so just don't come running to me right away as soon as you come across something you don't understand, saying, Prabhupada, what is this, what is that? And he said, just keep reading, and the understanding will emerge. See, so sometimes it's not like, we shouldn't freak out if we read something and we don't get it right away. It's okay. Just keep reading, keep thinking about it, keep chanting, and Krishna will reveal to us how to understand it. And maybe Krishna has already revealed that to somebody. Archita Prabhu.
Well, if you go back in the chapter beginning with text number 8, it states that in Satya Yuga, the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to that Kardama Muni and displayed his transcendental form, which can be understood only through the Vedas. So he's speaking to a person. And then goes on to describe from there up to where we are now, what is the nature of that person. So his entire prayer nullifies the impersonal understanding, because he's dealing with a person who he understands to be the Supreme Person and who is revealing himself in that way, and it can also be understood through the Vedas. And in today's verse, that the very word swayam, unto you, and that's why Prabhupada is making that analogy, a comparison to the spider, that the spider's energies come out of the spider, but the spider doesn't become impersonal. The spider is the personal source of the energies that are emanating from him or her.
Yes. So the two words you're suggesting are eka swayam, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Okay. Shamarari.
I'll take a shot and I'll say that eka Advitiya, one without a second. God is Krishna. God or Krishna is one without a second.
Okay. Prabhupada says here in the purport that the example of the spider is very significant also. So I did a little study on how the spider creates his web. Apparently it comes out of his stomach. You know, he has like a whole apparatus there where these, he generates this, like, it comes out like it's a fluid and it goes through a little, like a funnel kind of thing. And then it comes out initially as like almost a liquid, but then it, you know, kind of comes in contact with the air. It's very lightweight, and it's just kind of comes out, and he pulls it out with his legs. Anyway, it's really amazing how they create the whole web. You know, I was watching a whole video about it, and it's really like high tech. You know, it's amazing how they do it, and they have a very set way they do it. It's not haphazard. It's, you know, they're really kind of like architects. And how Prabhupada talks about, he refers to it as play, but it seems like it's anything but play for the spider. They're deadly serious about how they do that, because that's how they eat. You know, the web is what they use to trap the different insects, and then they prey upon them, you know, once they get caught in the web. And the way they wind it up, they don't actually pull it back in, you know, they eat it. The spiders eat because it's kind of like a silk. It has some protein. Anyway, it's been observed that they eat the web, and that's how they retract it. That's how they get it all back. But there's no. I mean, very much so that the spider does not. The spider does not become the web. The spider, you know, emanates the web and then uses it and retracts it. But the spider doesn't lose its, you know, individuality, its existence in the process of creating its web. So, Vasu?
Material spiritual energy does not render the creator impersonal.
That's the analogy. Just like the spider, he doesn't become impersonal when he puts his web out there.
Yeah, so
he's still a spider, and he's got a web. And then when he wants to, he eats that web, and he's still a spider without the web. See, but either way, he's there. And so in the same way, the creator, ultimately, you know, Krishna, he sends out his energies, and they do this, that, and the other thing. And then when he wants, he can withdraw, retract, reverse the whole process. But in both cases, he's there intact as a distinct individual personality.
And he also goes on to say that Krishna is sentient, and he can hear the prayers. So that's beyond impersonalism. In other words, it's not all one. Krishna is a sentient being, like you're sentient, I'm sentient.
Yep.
So everyone is sentient, living entities. So that also proves that that Krishna is not just everything's all one, as the impersonalists suggest.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything they want to say? Okay. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.